Welcome to the very first episode of Retro Spectrum. I'm Holly.
And I'm Isaiah, and this is a podcast where we listen to a band's entire discography and then try to shrink it down into about an hour-long conversation.
And this week, we're talking about The Clash.
The only band that matters. We'll cover their formation, influence on other bands, our opinions of the different albums, and kind of talk a little bit about how they eventually disbanded.
Join the conversation on our socials at Retrospectrum Pod.
And keep up with future episodes by subscribing on your podcast service of choice.
And check out our Patreon. The first 25 subscribers will be grandfathered in to all future perks.
And just as a side note, we know that there are some sound quality issues on this episode. Those have been addressed and will be better in future episodes. Enjoy the show.
All the young bugs.
All the young punks. Oh, no, it's all the young dudes. Which, like, I mean, if we're being honest, probably.
Literally every song is inspired by The Clash.
Dude, thank you. I can't stop. Every time I'm like, yeah. So we were listening to The Police, and Wes was like, oh, The Police, huh? And I was like, yeah, The Police wouldn't have been able to write this album if it hadn't have been for The Clash introducing reggae. And I was like, it's ruined me for all other music.
Well, you know what? That's how a lot of things are for me. When you find out the roots of something, it's hard to ignore or not notice.
Which I think is gonna happen a lot doing this.
Oh, for sure. Because I started trying to make a list of bands influenced by The Clash, and I was like, why am I even doing this? This is just every band we talk about is gonna be like, yeah, they're obviously inspired by The Clash, and all the other bands.
It's like every band that was released after 1977 was influenced by The Clash, who in turn were influenced by a lot of other people. I mean, they're not particularly original in any sense. I just think they smashed everything together.
Absolutely. And I was gonna say, did you do any research? I meant to do this, but I didn't have time. Did you do any research on like the history of punk or like the first official punk band?
No, because I don't care about that. Like, who cares?
Well, I mean, it's just cool if someone invented a new genre.
Yeah, and I don't think that was The Clash. But I mean, I don't think there was like...
Are we sure?
I don't think there was like a day where it was like, and now we have punk. Because, it goes back to like...
Right.
Because Iggy was way before any of these dudes. I think there was aggressive underground music at all points. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there is like the first punk album or whatever, but to me, it's more of like a sliding scale than it is like it didn't exist and now it does exist.
I feel like the Ramones are one of the bands that everyone acts like is the first punk band.
Yeah, but they probably have also played up that image to help them sell records and like be the first punk band.
What was your like history with The Clash? Did you listen to them when you were a kid?
I mean, kid, not until high school. I very specifically remember the first time that they like went from being a name of the first punk band or whatever that everybody talked about to like actually listening to them and trying to get into them. I was a junior in high school and we went to the Sam Goody CD store in the mall in Lawton and bought The Clash Combat Rock because everybody got like their one CD or whatever because we were all poor and that was all we could afford. So we all got our one CD. And I remember, I think it was me because I think I ended up keeping it, but I got a copy of Combat Rock and was like, I grew up on like SoCal pop punk, Drive Through Records and Blink-182 and all that stuff. And so I was expecting this like skater punk, fast beats, loud, aggressive music and put it in and like all this weird overdubbed like reggae and like kind of, it's not really fast, but it was like all kind of dancey and sort of disco. I was very confused about what I was listening to. I was like, is this the same band that like everybody's made such a big deal out of? Like it did not click with me. I didn't really understand what I was listening to. So I wasn't really that into them whenever I first found out about them. It wasn't until later on in college that I actually spent some more time listening to their other stuff that actually figured out like, oh wait, they were really influential. That was a weird place to jump in and a weird like expectation to have to jump in.
That kind of surprises me because I don't know. I guess I was really into the Ramones, the Clash, and the Sex Pistols all when I was like in junior hires. And I don't even recall, I have no recollection of how I heard of them. I don't know if maybe I saw them on like MTV or Much Music or something. Because I was, growing up, Dad was always playing music and MTV was fucking constantly playing in our house. MTV, Much Music, VH1, whatever. Constant music. So I'm assuming that their videos were probably playing on that. I honestly do not know how I got introduced to the Clash. I just remember when I was a teenager just loving all of those old punk bands so much. I was really obsessed with the Ramones. Like I had a Ramones lunchbox. I was really obsessed with the Sex Pistols. I had a big Sex Pistols book. I didn't have a bunch of Clash like memorabilia or anything like that, like I did for the other bands. But I really always really loved them. But I was only really familiar with the Clash, the first album, and then London Calling and Combat Rock. Those were like the 3 albums that I knew.
Yeah, I think I knew the songs like Train in Vain and Should I Stay or Should I Go? Like I knew those songs, but I don't think I ever associated them with a particular artist or like thought of them as like being Clash songs. I think when I started attaching the band to those songs, it was like, oh, that's who sings this. Like they were just songs that were always around.
Yeah.
So it was kind of even surprising to think to learn that they were the ones who wrote those songs that were just radio songs that you kind of grew up hearing or whatever.
Right. I almost feel like Should I Stay or Should I Go could have been on like a commercial or something.
Right. And I'm sure that's probably where I heard it first, was on a commercial or just on like regular radio, like classic rock radio or whatever.
Wild to think about that. Like thinking about how they're a punk band specifically, like quote, your first intro to them being
quote unquote
a commercial.
It was all advertising from the beginning.
So how many albums? They have 1, 2, 6. Is that right?
Yeah. And then there's the EP, and then there's a ton of there's the 2, I think, like sanctioned live albums. And then there's a ton of bootleg stuff that I think we've decided we're going to avoid the bootlegs.
Yes. That's just too much. But I did listen to all 6 studio albums. I listened to both live albums, which are From Here to Eternity and Live at the Shea Stadium. I actually listened to Raw and Unfiltered, which was just them talking. And I listened to the EP of them talking called Having Words. I listened to the Cost of Living EP. I listened to Escapades of Futura EP and both compilations, which Sound System and Hits Back. And one of them seemed to be their entire discography.
Yeah, I looked at it and it was like 9 hours. I was like, I'm pretty sure that's just all of everything.
It's 8 hours, I think. But yeah, I listened to all their shit at least 3 times, which is a lot.
I listened to all of them a couple of times, the major albums and the EP. I have listened to the live albums before, but I didn't do it for this.
It's not really necessary. I mean, all the live shit and the compilations aren't necessary at all, but because it's just their same shit from all the other shit over and over again. But yeah, so how did you listen to it? Did you do it in a specific way, or?
I mean, I did it chronologically starting off. Most of it I did streaming digital, but I tried to use headphones and tried to sit and read the lyrics along with it and like not be doing other stuff while I was listening to it, which is part of what took me so long to do it, is because I'm usually like doing 3 other things while I'm playing music or like driving in the car or whatever. But I really wanted to be like zeroed in and focused because I wanted to look for like themes and that sort of stuff and all the lyrics. I did end up listening to London Calling and the self-titled album on vinyl on like a stereo, like loud, not in headphones. So I got a little bit of that in there too. But most of it was streaming.
And sitting in that chair mostly.
And sitting in this chair.
I did mine all sorts of places. Like the first listen I did while I was building stuff. And then the second listen, I tried to sit down and be more deliberate about it and take some notes, which I didn't take as many notes, I don't think, as you did. I have 1 page.
Well, I didn't listen as many times as you did, so it'll balance out, I think.
Well, and the reason I didn't feel the need to take that many notes is because I'm so familiar with their music already.
Yeah.
I feel like I felt like I already know the albums well enough to remember what they sound like without having to write it down. But yeah, so the first album I thought was a very strong start.
Yeah, it's great. It's strong from top to bottom.
It really is.
And I think
mean,
it's the one that has cemented them as one of the like punk rock bands or whatever. And really after this one, it's like everything after this, they're moving further and further and further away from.
Yeah. Or, growing, some might say.
Yeah. Which not okay. Not acceptable.
Not in the punk world.
Yeah.
The punk world does not like for you to change your sound at all. But the Clash did it in a really smart way, I thought. Their first album, the fact that it's self-titled is extremely appropriate. Like, that's the iconic Clash sound. I mean, and it's just so good. It holds up.
Well, it not only holds up, but you can still hear influences of this album in like present day recordings. The two vocals, one more like singy vocal and one more like mumbly, kind of hard to understand vocal, that's still hugely prominent in punk rock. It has been since these albums came out. But I also thought, because like we talked about the Ramones and the Sex Pistols both, those are like bands that almost pride themselves on like no lead guitar, no major melody stuff, like very straightforward power chords, downstrokes, very fast, very aggressive. And like 2 songs into the self-titled Clash album, it's like, oh wait, these guys actually know how to play their instruments. They're doing some different harmonies and stuff.
Except apparently Joe Strummer, which he got his name Strummer because he only strums down.
Right.
He only down strums.
Well, and I think that as you find out later in the Clash's discography, I think Mick Jones was really very heavily responsible for the like musicality of a lot of their songs. But it's in there, even in these like quote unquote punk rock songs. It's already more musical than a lot of
and apparently stuff. They attribute a lot of their sound to the drummer as well. Like his style, I guess, really meshed and was distinctive. I feel like their first album, you can totally tell some of their songs had such huge influence on everything that came after, like Sex Pistols, Descendants, every classic punk band that you can think of. Like, What's My Name? That song? Mm-hmm. Classic punk sound. I mean,
that song is in particular is on my lows because it is so like, I don't know, so straightforward.
When I hear songs like that, I just can't not think of all the bands that they're so influenced by, or that are so influenced by them,
I don't know. That felt a little more like, it's fine. It's just not as interesting.
Classic punk album. Protects Blue. That's another one that those are both of my lows on this album. Are What's My Name and Protects Blue. Those are my 2 least favorite tracks. I specifically think White Riot is a perfect punk rock song, like because it's got all the musical elements to it too, but it's protesty, but like in a snarky, sarcastic sort of way. Like all these people are so upset. I want something to be upset about. Also, like I don't know. I thought that it did a really good job of capturing the punk like sound and mentality. So you phrased it as they want something to be upset about.
Yeah.
Was that your take on that song?
In the lyrics, I want a riot of my own in there at some point, like the whole lyrical.
There apparently the point of that song for Joe was that he thinks that white people need to be rioting along with black people and queers and shit.
Right. But I think they draw attention to that by being sarcastic and like separating the white people out from it. Like by they want something of their own to be upset about, rather than being upset about the things that the other people are, those other communities are writing about. They want their
what
own
I got
thing to,
was
like,
that
them.
Well, yeah, I guess that makes sense. What I got was that they need to be rioting also.
Right.
For the same reasons.
Yes. But the way that they say that is by telling that song or like telling that story from the perspective of like a white person who's not involved in their problems, saying like, I want to be upset about something. I want my own thing to riot about, rather than writing about the things that are actually upsetting that they should be already writing about. They're like looking for other things to be upset about.
Okay. So what are your favorite songs on this album?
Highs, White Riot, and Career Opportunities, which I kind of feel are a cop out because those are like 2 of the most popular songs off this album, but they're just great songs.
They really are. I'm So Bored with the USA is classic also.
I listened to that song. I was watching the Super Bowl on mute while I was listening to this album.
Perfect.
And it lined up perfectly where that song lined up while the national anthem was playing, and it really tickled me.
It doesn't get any better than that.
That brought me some joy.
Listening to music while watching sports on mute is just, it makes everything about the sport a million times better. Like, even if it's classical music and you're watching basketball, it turns it into a ballet, which I love. So the second album sounded a little more produced.
It did. You know why? I thought this was really funny.
Because it was a little more produced.
Shocker. So they recorded this one in New York with the same producer for that worked with Blue Oyster Cult.
Oh, yeah.
And which, all the punk rockers were already screaming sellout, I think, at that point. But I listened to it, and I was listening to it with headphones, and deep in the mix of like 75% of these songs is a cowbell. There's a ton of cowbell on this album, which, if you know the cowbell skit or sketch or whatever on SNL, is Blue Oyster Cult song playing with him coming in and banging the cowbell. So I imagine that happened in the studio. I imagined that the whole time I was listening to it. There's a lot of cowbell on this song, in addition to some other instruments. Yeah,
cowbell's an interesting addition to punk rock already. So they're already, just with the second album, moving into a new direction, basically. Throwing in some new elements.
Well, and I noticed the first album is extremely British. Like,
yes, it's London punk,
London
to a T.
And garage land, which I just get. It tickles me every time I listen to that song.
I know it. Before I knew the name of that song, I did not know what the fuck he was saying.
That goes with almost every song. It's like, well, even reading it sometimes, it's like, I don't think that's what you actually said on there, dude. There were a ton of times where the lyrics were just like parentheses, ... parentheses. It's like, yeah, your guess is as good as ours. You had to be there. But this one already is like branching out from looking at just London and like the streets that they grew up on. And it's already starting to get like more globally focused, which I think is a theme that will grow and expand in every album, like from the beginning on. I think that until we get to the end, but I think that becomes like a specific focus is like what's happening in other parts of the world and like, developments outside of London. And I think recording it outside of England, and I think they spent some time in Jamaica too, that like kind of opened their eyes to other influences. And I think that comes through in the sound and the lyrics and kind of the whole vibe starting on this album.
Yeah. And I think it's really cool that the thing about punk specifically, more than any other genre, I feel like, is the fans or whatever, whoever, the masses of punk kids get so fucking pissed off if you deviate from this very specific format. And the thing that's so cool about the Clash, and I think the reason that they've lasted, this long as such an influential and important band, is because they didn't let their peers bully them into anything. They had their own personal influences, everyone in the band, like different styles of music, and they all combined it together fearlessly to make something new and different and unusual, and that most punk people wouldn't consider punk anymore.
Yeah, and I think this to me is really the last album of theirs that really can hold the punk rock label or title or whatever. I think after this, there's so many other influences, so many other things happening that it doesn't, other than like the mentality of it. There's not much sonically that really ties me to punk rock after this album.
I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of songs. There's a lot more future songs that are punk to me that they come.
But as a whole, like as a whole album,
I think because their roots are punk, that their punk roots are in every song, even if there's other influences in the song as well. I mean, once we get to Sandinista, the shit gets really weird, but
it certainly do. Although, man, I'm psyched to talk about that because I have some theories.
Okay, well, the third album. Did you have anything?
Wait, hold on. Let's do highs and lows on Give 'Em Enough Rope. What are your favorite tracks on that one?
My favorites are, I don't know. All the Young Punks get stuck in my head a lot. What are yours?
Tommy Gun,
Everybody loves Tommy Gun.
Yeah, again, I know, but they're just great songs.
Yeah.
Julie's been working for the Drug Squad, and
Working for the Drug Squad.
yeah, that's the one. And Stay Free as my highs.
I didn't actually write down highs for like every album or anything.
I did as I was going through them.
So what are your lows then?
Last Gang in Town and Drug Stabbing Time. I think I just don't like that phrase.
Yeah. Well, London Calling was even more produced than the last one, I would say.
Yeah.
And
agreed.
I feel like it's very polished and they have a real grasp of themselves at this point.
Yes.
As a band.
I like all the extra layers, all the horns and all the keys and organ and like, I don't know. I love that there's so much happening on this album, but it also feels like loose and it's produced and polished, but it also is like fun. Like there's stuff in the background of like people talking or, you know, yelling. And I don't know. It just sounds like you're really in the room with them while they're recording these songs a little bit. Like it kind of sounds more natural, I guess, than music tends to these days.
Well, yeah, I feel like at this point they were so comfortable with themselves and their style and their dynamic as a band that they were able to have that fun, you know, in a still really produced, polished sort of way.
Yeah.
I feel like this album like really cemented them in the hippies and punks that came before and after them. At their core, they're anti-establishment, and their overall message is what has like incrementally improved society. Like albums like this change the fucking world.
Yeah. Well, and I know we had talked a little bit about this versus Combat Rock as like their peak or whatever, but I think this is it. I think this does the best job of bringing all their influences out without being like consumed by them, you know, where they still have that like what makes them, but like they're also adding a bunch of other stuff to the pot and kind of mixing it all together and it all comes out. And I think they get a little bit lost in that and in some future releases.
I feel like London Calling is their like quintessential sound. Yeah. But then Combat Rock is like their older brother. Yeah. You know what I mean? In a good way. I love
London Calling. It's one of my favorite albums. And it was the one that like really once I dug into it, I was like, now I get it. Now I know why like people are still talking about them all these years later. And it's also one of these albums that has been like so dissected and analyzed and looked at. And I mean, it's hard to bring anything new to the table in an analysis of this album. But
this album is their legacy for sure.
Yes, definitely.
So what are your favorites?
Spanish Bombs, which I think is my favorite Clash song. That's what I've been saying for years. And I think it holds true after this. I don't know. There's a lot of them. I tried to pick clearly not London Calling or, you know, the ones that literally everybody knows. So as Spanish Bombs, Card Cheat, and I'm Not Down as my high points on this album, because I think those are kind of indicative of all the different styles and sounds that they're trying to do here. Like there's so much more reggae and ska influence that's like kind of brought to the forefront now, you know, with songs like Guns of Brixton and all that stuff. I also like that they let the bass player do some lead vocals, you know, they're spreading it out a little bit. And it just seems like they like sing? He's Guns of Brixton. It just seems like they're like not afraid to try anything on this album. And for the most part, I think it all works.
Yes. And that's how this differs from their experiments on the next album.
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, the song Lost in the Supermarket?
Yeah.
I was reading about that and it just bums me out because Joe wrote that song for Mick to sing, but like wrote it about what he imagined his childhood was like.
That's fucked up.
I know, it's like, it's sad. And I also feel like it's kind of mean. Like, it's kind of like, I don't know. It's a great song, but it's like, oh, okay, man. I don't know.
Let him write a song about his own childhood.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, yeah, this is how I'm going to write the song about this kid that nobody cared about that lived in these crappy apartments. And yeah, I don't know. I thought that was funny.
So Sandinista.
Here we go. Let's do it.
What a shit show.
No, come on. It's not all bad. There are 36 tracks on here. It's a triple LP. And I think they like what I gathered, they did that to see what they could get away with. And I think they also did it kind of as a joke of all the bands that were releasing double LPs. And it's like, they just did London Calling as a double LP. And they're like, why not do it one more? You know, why not go even further? But I thought, so because I was trying to figure out like, why do this? Why release 36 songs? Why not cut it down? If you saw, there's the Sandinista Now, which is the promo album that they sent to all the like radio stations and like promotional outlets to get press for it. It's 12 tracks long. All those songs are the 12 best songs off Sandinista. And it's like, why didn't you make that the album? But I found a quote from Mick Jones where he says that he always saw it as a record for people who were like on oil rigs or like Arctic stations, people who weren't able to get to the record stores regularly. So it's like, if you think of it like that, it's like, here's all the Clash you're going to need for a while. If you go by Sandinista, you're going to have enough Clash music.
Possibly ever after hearing this
Possibly
album.
ever. But like, I don't think it's meant to be listened to in order from start to finish. Mostly because it's 2 hours and 45 minutes longer. It's just too long to do all in one sitting.
I beg to differ. I did it multiple times.
Well, that says more about you than it does about the album, I think. But when
it's too fucking long.
When I was listening to it, I broke it down. It's 6 songs per side per album. Like if you were thinking about listening to it on a record, like it was originally released. And it like puts a lot of the songs in context better than just streaming it from top to bottom for 2.5 hours and listening to like everything. Like where the songs end coincide really well with how a side ends. And each side kind of has its own personality, which
so you listen to it that way.
Yes. Like I listened to it basically like 6 songs at a time over the course of like 3 or 4 days.
And that made it more enjoyable.
It made it so much more enjoyable because I have listened to it all at once. And it's just like halfway through, you're like, oh my God, I got 16 more of these songs.
Will it ever end?
Yeah, it's just, it's too much. It's too long. But if you break it into little snippets and you think like, oh, I'm going to listen to disc 2, side 3 or whatever, you would get like that vibe. Like each side has kind of its own vibe a little bit. So that made it like more digestible to me rather than.
Well,
just
I need to try to listen to
time.
it like that because as listening to it in one long sitting, I just kept thinking they sound confused.
Yeah.
Like they sound like they're experimenting on a bunch of different shit and some producer should have been like, rein it in.
Yeah.
And it also sounds to me like they heard the Talking Heads for the first time and then made this album.
Yeah, I definitely wrote Talking Heads in here a couple of times. Like
and on the last album, I was thinking that I forgot to say this, but there's a song, Death or Glory.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I hear that, I can't not think of Rancid. That sounds like a Rancid song.
So Rancid is one of those bands that's like, look at Rancid's vocalist. You have the one dude who's like the more like singy, I don't know, nasally high pitched. Then you've got Tim Armstrong, who was doing his best Joe Strummer impression, I think, from day one, where it's like, fill your mouth up with dirt and then try to like not move your tongue while you enunciate all your words. It's like he's doing the cartoon version of Joe Strummer.
Yeah.
Who is like very close to just impossible to understand through a lot of these.
And apparently at the beginning he had no teeth.
Oh, really?
Yes. When I think it was the drummer or maybe it was Mick Jones. One of them, the first time that they went to go see Joe playing in the 101ers to like see if they wanted him to sing for their band, basically he had no teeth. but he ended up getting his teeth fixed, you know, when they got money or whatever.
Well, I don't think they, from all the stuff that I read, they never really got money, or like whatever money they did get was spent
Joe
on
apparently
live
didn't give a
shows and-
shit about money.
Yeah.
So
Which I think ended up being part of why they split. Because I could see like, yeah, we've been working for a long time. Like people want to give us money for this stuff. Why don't we let them, you know?
yeah.
But again, I think that's that punk rock holding each other down.
For him, I don't think it was that punk rock thing, because I feel like him and this band as a whole really did not fucking bow to any pressure from their punk peers at all. The vibe I get is they didn't give a shit what anybody thought and just did their own thing, and he just did happen to not give a shit about money, which I relate to. It is so hard for me to make any money because I just don't give a fuck about it. I'm not motivated by it at all, really. I mean, if there's two jobs and one pays more, but one is one that I'd rather do, I'll do the one that I'd rather do. You know?
Yeah.
And I feel like that was just his vibe too. He just wanted to experience and live life and didn't really care about capitalist bullshit. He was actually seemed pretty opposed, which, you know, same. So what are your favorites?
Wait, hold on. We can't. I got too many thoughts. The Sandinista
Okay.
is really like the nut that I had to crack with this.
Okay. Hit me.
So, all right. The first thing where you're like really, where it really starts to lose it a little bit is the dub covers. It's at the end of, it's like tracks 11 and 12. One More Time and One More Dub. It's like the song. And then
Mhm.
immediately after that is the same song, but like the dub version.
Yeah.
When you're listening to it, you're like, why am I listening to 10 minutes of the same song over and over again? But if you think about it as an album, that dub one ends the second album. So it's not like it goes into the next. It's just like a bonus track or like a secret track at the end of the first 11 song album or whatever.
To me, it was like a reprise in a musical.
Yeah, it was exactly that. But it was weird. It was weird to me to have them one right after the other a little bit. But like thinking of that as being the end of a side. And then the next track is where they start to have like skits and people like talking about stuff and like the overdub, like voiceover stuff.
Mhm.
And it's like that would make sense if you thought about starting that album, you put that on and then you get your narration thing that talks to you about, it's the DJ, I think, that's like, and then at the end they're like, hey, can we get some music or whatever? And then they start playing some music. So like is weird in the middle of all these songs, but like totally makes sense as the start of the second disc. So it's just, there was a lot of stuff like that popped up, and like, I really want to get this and have to like have each side kind of segmented, because I did it manually. I really
digitally.
want that like actual having to get up and flip the record over
Yeah,
sort of thing.
I need to try to listen to it like that because I love musicals. So if it did like a thing like that, that would
Yeah.
make a lot more sense to me.
Well, and like the second disc ends with not the little kids singing Career Opportunities or whatever, but it's the little kids singing at the end of the other song. And it's just like this weird instrumental thing. And then the little kid sings, and then the kid's like, okay, I'm done singing now. And then the song ends, but that would be the end of the disc. So, you know, it's like it has, they have all these little weird tags, but they're weird in the middle of the album, but they kind of make sense in context as like the end of a side of a disc.
Yeah.
So I thought that, I don't know, that like helped me put this into context and make a little bit more sense of it, except for disc 3. There's nothing good on that one. It could just, it's like, there's 2 good tracks and they
What's
both,
on disc 3?
I didn't write down the names of the songs. I could look them up.
Honestly, okay. When I first sat down to listen to Sandinista, the first song played, The Magnificent Seven, and I love this song.
Yeah.
Love it. Absolutely love it. It's so goddamn groovy. As soon as it started playing, I was like, ooh, I'm going to love this album. I can
Yeah.
tell. I don't think I've ever even listened to this album before. Like I was familiar with all their other albums, I think, except this one. And I don't know how this escaped me. I guess it just wasn't as popular. And back when I was buying CDs and
Well, and I
shit
think this
was-
one's hard to buy. I don't think this one was re-released a lot. Like London Calling and Combat Rock are readily available, and this one I'm sure is not as much.
Right. And when I started listening to this music as a teen, I was buying CDs, so it would make sense that I had never seen this before.
Right.
So this Magnificent Seven starts playing, and I'm like, ooh, I'm gonna love this record. I can already tell this is gonna be like my favorite record of theirs. Like, I'm fucking loving it. And then the next song plays, and then the next song plays, and I'm just like, wait a minute, what?
Yeah, I'm already out. How many more are there? The end of the first
2
song,
hours.
the end of the first song, they make a comment about how long the song is. While Joe's just like talking, he's like, says something about how long it is, and I'm like, yeah, that's a real problem. Like, every single one of these songs should have faded out at like minute 4 at the max, but so many of them go to like 5.5, 6.5 minutes. It's like, it's too much. It's too repetitive, and it makes it kind of rambly, where if they would have just tightened a few things up, I think there's a lot of really good stuff on here. But I think they did that intentionally. I think that was part of what they were doing, was like, let's see how far we can take this. They had to have.
Yeah, they had to have. The Magnificent, especially having that comment right after the first song, like, this is too long.
Yeah,
we're already telling you right off the bat, buckle up. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we go into Hitsville, UK, which is just, to me, an annoying song.
I find it funny because you want to know what I wrote about that song?
Yeah.
That it has some real Rocky Horror Picture Show vibes, but not the original one, the sequel, the Denton TV one or whatever. Like, it sounds like a song that would have been in the
Shock
sequel
Treatment?
to yeah. Is that the name of it?
Yes.
The one that's all set in the Denton TV studio or whatever.
Uh-huh.
It's like,
and Shock Treatment was the one that everyone thought was really bad.
yes, exactly. It's like, remind you of the thing that you like, but like, it's just, if you're being honest with yourself, it's just not as good as
it's just
the
too
other stuff.
goddamn happy. It does sound, it's funny that you say like a TV studio type of thing, because that's what I thought. It sounds like it would be some kind of fucking morning show song or some shit. But anyway, Magnificent Seven and The Call Up are two of my favorite Clash songs. The Call Up is one of my favorite Clash songs, period. Like, that song really gets me going.
You got to watch have you seen the video for that?
No.
They're like in some abandoned warehouse and all wearing like weird post-apocalyptic stuff. And the drummer is in the back of the like armor, the military vehicles where they all sit in the back on the little benches or whatever. His drums are set up inside of that, and they're like sitting on the hoods of buses. You'd really dig it. It's very,
that sounds awesome.
Thunderdome.
Fuck yeah. I worked on a movie one time where we had to shoot a scene in the back of one of those big army trucks like that. So I've been in one of those, and they're crazy, like just huge and heavy duty weird.
I wrote my highs were Rebel Waltz. I put Hitsville, UK on my highs. So I don't know. I guess just different strokes. And Police on My Back. That's the one song from this album that gets stuck in my head all the time.
That one is really good too.
And I know it's a cover of an older song, but it's very catchy. And then my lows were disc 3, all of disc 3. It's just that.
Is The Call Up on disc 3?
I don't know. I don't have the track list.
How many are on each one? 6?
6. So that'd be tracks 25 through 36. But it's got the little kid version.
Barely missed it.
Of career opportunities, which is like a fun idea, but to set through the 2.5 minutes of it playing every time, it's like that's too much.
Long enough. So I wrote Combat Rock is probably their best. It's a return to their, to form with some experimental shit from Sandinista kind of bleeding through. I feel like part of what's hard about Sandinista is there was no like message or theme or whatever. Like, you get into the actual Sandinistas and you can learn all about that stuff. And I think they were trying to say something there, but there was also just a lot of stuff that was kind of all over the place. And then Combat Rock, it's like, we're back. But the first thing I wrote is right off the bat, this is 1,000 times better. Like, it just is like, oh my God, that we're back. We wrote songs. They wrote songs this time. We're not just jamming. A return to form, but still it's a true blend of everything that they had done before.
Yeah.
And honestly made it such an incredible album, because I think they're toying around on Sandinista just elevated, their prior vibe.
Yes. Yeah, I
As,
agree.
as excruciating as it is to listen to. Like, I'm glad that they
Like
did it.
we didn't need to be there for that. We didn't need to be in
Exactly.
the room while it was happening, but I am glad that it happened.
Well, yes, because it furthered their sound, as a band. But again, a producer needed to be like, okay, good for you, but put those on some secret thing that you release.
Yes,
But yeah,
but it was an
combat
immediate
rock.
return to the themes of like anti-police, anti-violence, anti-war. Like all that stuff is right immediately back to like, no, this is what we're about. This is what our message is, And the
Right.
first
fucking
three,
track, man.
the whole first side from beginning to end, like the first 6 or 7 tracks or whatever, there's not a bad second on the first side of this album. It's perfect.
So my whole teenage years, Know Your Rights was probably my favorite Clash song.
Yeah, it's a good one.
It's a fucking incredible song. I still love it so very much. It's still something, every single fucking theme and message in all of their music is still shit that we need to be hearing today. Because we still haven't gotten it right.
Yes.
It's so goddamn relevant, and Know Your Rights, especially with all this fucking police brutality and shit. Every song, that has anything to do with police brutality, which is a lot of them.
Yeah.
It's just hitting the fucking nail on the head. And it's so infuriating to go back and listen to this shit. And the hippies and the punks have been right all along and have been saying the same shit this whole fucking time, all these years, hundreds of years, as long as humanity has existed. There have been people saying, no, this isn't right. We got to cut this shit out. But then somehow we're still not. I don't understand how this message hasn't sunk into the masses,
Well, because being the police, being the cops, being the people in power is good if you're the people in power. And so while we think
but
that
that's
everybody
such a
should
small
have
percentage of the population. I don't understand how.
I don't necessarily think that's true. I think there are a lot of people who, I think the majority rules. I think the people who are the punks and the hippies are the reason it's a subculture is it's a smaller subset.
No, what I'm saying is the police is a small section of society.
Right. But I think they have the support of a very large section because I think
my question is why?
Because they actively support the interest of the majority. That's the whole reason they're designed is to keep.
I don't think they
like
do.
They are.
That's the point of all this music is no, they don't have our best interest in mind.
If you're the person that they're keeping down, but that's a small.
Which is all of us.
Well, in reality, yes, but I think the idea
in reality is where I would like to live. That's
Sure.
where I'm bringing
good,
this conversation from.
Yeah. No, I agree with you, but it's
just fucking frustrating to me and has been literally my entire life. I came out as this weirdo little hippie kid from day one. Like that's how I just came out of the womb like that. And so it's been mind fucking boggling to me my entire life that there can be so many people spreading this word, in their art and everything politically, and how the fuck have the masses not caught on yet is what I'm confused about. I don't get it. And anyway, that's why this band has the legacy that they have, because everything they say is so fucking relevant still to this day.
Well, and I can't tell you the amount of times that they're a very lyrically smart band. I would listen to these and then like a Ramones song would play after it or whatever. And it was like, I want to sniff glue or whatever. And it's like, haha, okay, funny. But like, I just learned about the Sandinistas in Nicaragua and like the whole history of all that stuff. And like, I'm Googling all these terms and phrases and people and revolutions. And like, they packed a lot of information into a very small space, and it is really a gateway to like learn more about the world around you, learn more about how things actually work. And I think they're one of the most lyrically intelligent bands that came out of this era, that came out of all the punk rock movement stuff, because I think they crammed a ton of stuff into all their songs, which is another reason why they're stuff like that, that really makes you think. But it's
every
like why
time
you can talk
say
about
revolution, I just want to say, oh yeah.
There's our first sound drop. But it's like that's why you can still talk about them now, is because there's like each verse of each song has so much to unpack. And
we're
so
going to
much
talk about a fuck ton of bands that don't have a
well,
solid
yeah,
message.
yeah. We started off with the Top Shelf,
a very important band. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a fucking world changing shit. And that makes it feel so, we're talking about like Wyatt Riot and the fact that they are so political and they are trying to stand up for, minorities and shit, even though they're white dudes. And I feel like that makes it a little bit more acceptable that they take from so many black sounds.
Yeah. Well, they
Same
also
with
featured a
Talking
lot of
Heads.
those musicians on their
Same with
albums
Talking
too.
Heads, yes.
Yeah, they brought them into the studio and were really partners with them versus just stealing it and not giving. I think they were always pretty upfront about like these are influences.
Their influences.
These are
Yes.
They're
not saying we made this up. They're
yeah.
saying we are extremely influenced by black music.
Yeah.
And this is our spin on it.
Well, and it's reggae, and it's that the reading about the start of hip hop and how Mick Jones was like so into the beginnings of hip hop in New York, and like really wanted to incorporate that into the Clash sound. It was like they were always up with what was happening. To
they have
mixed
one
results,
song.
I think.
Right.
At times, but
Totally. But I applaud experimental shit in art, and also it's a tricky thing to take influence from other things, although we all do, regardless of whether we're conscious of it or not.
Right.
But the fact that they were conscious of it and, were open about it.
I mean, like compare it to Elvis, who just stole the songs and then said they were Elvis songs and then made $1 billion, and those
and
people
that's how
never
you
got
piss
the
people
recognition.
off. Yeah, you steal the black sound and then fucking make a bunch of money off of it and don't give any credit to your influences. Yeah. That's how you do it wrong. The Clash fucking did it right, because it's a fine line between cultural appropriation and just being influenced by something.
So I have my highs for combat rock as all of side A, which I believe is the first 7 tracks. Like it's perfect. There's nothing wrong with it. My only low was overpowered by funk. It's okay. It's kind of, I think, that one of like the early hip hop influenced ones that just doesn't really hold up as well as a lot of the other stuff. That's the other thing, is like all the reggae stuff ages really well, and I think some of the like hip hop influenced stuff sounds like early hip hop, and what's kind of become like the joke version of hip hop now. Like it sounds like that, even though it was probably fresh at the time.
Yes. Okay. So the first hip hop song ever played on MTV, or the first hip hop video, was fucking Blondie.
Yeah.
And her like talking rap,
Yeah. Yes, exactly. My name is Blondie and I'm here to say.
Yes. And one of the Clash songs reminded me of that song so much. I don't remember which one. Is it Overpowered by Funk?
I think that's the one on this album. So now, this brings us to Cut the Crap, which is the final studio album by The Clash, or by some version of The Clash.
Yeah. Yeah, it was extremely watered down.
So do you want to talk about what happened in the lead up to this album that kind of caused it to be this way?
Go ahead.
It's missing Topper, the drummer, and Mick Jones, the second guitar player and vocalist. They were both fired. Topper for being addicted to heroin and that becoming a big issue. So they let go of him. They ended up replacing him with first, I think, the original drummer that was on the self-titled album, and then they got another guy to fill in on tour and supposed to be to fill in on this album, even though he's not on the album, because they did all the drum tracks, or most of the drum tracks, with the drum machine on this album, which is like,
I wonder how that guy feels about all this.
There's
like,
an interview with him in one of
face.
there's the interview. Oh, the drummer.
Yes.
He's in one of the documentaries I watched, but the guy who programmed the drum machine is in another one. And he's like, we were trying to make something that sounded cool. Like this was supposed to be like cutting edge and cool. And it was just kind of like, it just didn't work out. Like nobody really thinks it worked out, but they fired the drummer for his drug issues. Which luckily, happy to say, he survived and I think is still alive. Like I think he kind of dropped out of music and dropped out of the scene, but he made it through.
I watched a bunch of BBC documentaries, and there was an interview with him saying
at the time of the documentary that he had just gotten clean like a couple years before.
Nice. Well, good for him. I'm glad, it's that story usually ends a lot worse than that. But
yeah, for sure.
I think the thing that affected the sound the most was the split after they fired Mick Jones. Because there's a lot of drama. I mean, you could talk a lot about just the space between Combat Rock and Cut the Crap. But their manager, Bernie Rhodes, was really controlling and I think really manipulative. And I think clearly wasn't there, but from all the stuff that I've read, he was manipulative and Joe was kind of like an easy target to manipulate. And that everything that he said basically was parroted by Joe. And there was this he kind of drove a wedge between him and Mick Jones. And according to Mick Jones said that he got him to sign his power of attorney over to his lawyer. So his lawyer would be the one to look at all the contracts and all the paperwork and all the money stuff. And then went to the other part of the band and was like, oh, Mick won't talk to us. He said that we have to go talk to his lawyer and he won't sign anything before his lawyer's read it. And we have to send everything to his lawyer. So was trying to drive them further and further apart from each other to the point that eventually they stopped talking to each other while they were on tour. And they didn't work well in the studio together, and eventually it got to the point where they decided to fire Mick Jones from the Clash, which to me is just immediately you're not the Clash anymore. That seems.
And that's how they all felt about it too, I believe.
Yeah.
Even Joe.
It just seems like you're cutting the band in half. I don't know. I think it was actually a pretty equal part between all four of them. But if you lose those two and then you have Joe and Paul on one side, and then Mick, who I think fought back by not letting them release stuff under the Clash for a long time. Cause he was I'm just as much the Clash as you guys are. I'm actually in the Clash and you guys are in the other band or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
actually that's true because the Clash already existed before Joe Strummer was in it.
Right. So I think he had a claim to the name, and I think all that stuff eventually got settled by the time that he had started Big Audio Dynamite. But he's even in interviews now, he's not very he could be really upset about it and talk a bunch of trash and make them all look really bad, because I don't think it was a good look for anybody. I think everybody kind of came out looking bad in this, but he's pretty even keeled as far as they kicked me out of the band and we were going different directions, because I think he wanted to do all the dub hip hop weird experimental stuff, and I think Paul and Joe and Bernie wanted to do a little more straightforward punk rock, rock and roll rockabilly stuff, mixed with all that other weird interpersonal tension between them that eventually led them to fire them. And then they replaced him, which I would take as a really big compliment, but they replaced Mick with two other guitar players. They had blind auditions for these two other guitar players to replace them live, and they toured with that 5-piece across the US, and it apparently was pretty well received. The shows were pretty good, and it was well,
by that point they were already legends.
Yeah, exactly. But I think there are people that went and saw those shows that said they were pretty good, which is another reason why when Cut the Crap came out, everybody was so ugh. They had heard the
fact that it's called Cut the Crap too.
Well, and there's a big interview with Joe where he's we're gonna cut the crap, we're gonna take it back to basics, we're punk rockers.
Well, they did do that.
They did, but it's the first time where it's
return to roots, and it sounds kind of rudimentary almost. It sounds like it could have been their first album.
I wrote unprofessional demos. It sounds like unprofessional recorded demos mixed by a guy who didn't know what they were doing, produced by a guy who didn't know what they were doing, which is because it was Bernie took over the band, and he replaced the two guitar players they hired to replace Mick are not on the album. The bass player is not on the album, and the drummer is mostly drum machine. It's just Joe and Bernie on the album. And then Bernie apparently stole the master tapes from the studio and went and mixed it on his own, and all that weird staticky stuff that's over the music when you can't hardly hear the lyrics because it's all talking over that's all him. All the weird vocal stuff where it's all mixed so low you can't really hear it over the music it's just because he didn't know what he was doing and did a bad job of it and wanted him to put himself in the band.
That's really sad.
It's really sad. It's a really, really, really sad to a really, really end to a really great band. Especially it was we're going up. And then boom, nosedive. And then it got really bad reviews And then Joe quit like that a month later, like instead of like trying to, because they had talked about like maybe remixing it and re-releasing it or whatever. But I think at that point he was just like, I'm done. This isn't.
I mean, his main guys are out of the band, so
yeah.
Well, that's the fucking point.
From the stuff that I saw, it was like he realized that like, oh, I'm being manipulated, and oh, this is not good. And he was like, I'm tired and I'm done. It sucks. Yeah.
Fuck that guy. That's fucked up. If you don't know all that sad stuff, it's a less sad album. I feel like, I mean, it's a sad album regardless.
Yeah.
It definitely feels like they were trying to return to their roots, but it definitely sounds like they are teenagers making their first album.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like cartoon versions of like punk songs. You know what I mean? Like it's the first time where they really feel like they're trying to fit a sound versus like making their own.
Yes. It also has like a very, speaking of fit a sound, it has a very 80s sound about it that
That's
I'm assuming
drum
that
machine.
I'm assuming that Bernie dude wanted to make it fit in more with radio shit or something.
Yeah.
Like punk, but 80s radio punk. I don't know. It's just got a weird funk on it. It's got a weird stank on it. Not a fan.
Highs, none really. This Is England was like the song that everybody thought was like, this is going to be the next great Clash song, you know? And it's an okay song. It's a fine song. Just the way this album sounds, it makes it almost unlistenable.
I would say that I didn't hate it as much as Sandinista when I first listened to everything, because Cut the Crap and Sandinista were the only two ones I didn't know.
Yeah.
And now I don't know, they're really neck and neck for me.
It bums me out. It's really bad. But I did find the guy on YouTube who has used some sort of algorithm to like separate the vocal tracks out and is remixing it and has re-released it as like an actually decently mixed, like it's the same songs. He tried to use as much original, just some dude that I found on the internet.
Technology, man.
But he's remixed them and re-released them. And I listened to 3 or 4 of them and they actually sound really good. Like they sound like real songs rather than these like whatever is on whatever ended up being on this album. Yeah, they sound like real songs. It made a significant difference in getting them mixed the right way and actually released in a way that's listenable. So it's not like it wasn't the songwriting necessarily that was bad, although I think the songwriting is still a lot more straightforward. I think Mick was the one that gave him all the weird influences and kind of took him down those curvy kind of unexpected paths. And this one's a lot more. Well,
and Joe too, because Joe was really, really into like world music.
Yeah.
And that's why I think he was more content with being like, okay, I'm done with the Clash. I'm moving on to, what was the band that?
Well, after the Clash, he did, the Mescaleros, but that was like late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, he didn't do much solo stuff.
The Mescaleros I am into.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and that has a very Talking Heads kind of vibe about it, you know, world music. What are their other spin-off bands? Did they have any?
So Mick Jones went on to start Big Audio Dynamite, which, man, they released their first album like right around the same time that Cut the Crap did. And their debut album is so much better.
Ouch.
Oh man. No kidding. Like ouch.
Oh, you fire me?
Yes. It still sounds really 80s, and it did a lot of the things that they were trying to do on Cut the Crap, I think. Like it uses a lot of drum machine. It does a lot of like out of dance beats and that sort of thing. But it's so much. It's night and day different between those two albums. So to have like We're Split and then he goes off and does something that's like
way better.
Yeah, it is sad. It just bums me out. The whole end of this, the way the Clash ended, bums me out. But Big Audio Dynamite released stuff up into the 90s, and Paul and went on to play in a couple of other side bands. And I think the drummer, I don't think he did much after they fired him. I think he did a solo album in like 86 and then didn't do anything after that.
A solo album for a drummer, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, they can play other instruments. You're not just. He wrote Rock the Casbah, like except for the lyrics. He wrote all the music and like recorded it by himself in the studio.
Wow. Isn't it wild how so many bands can have
like their main number one most famous popular song was written by like the drummer or something, but all the other songs are by the other guy, you know. There are so many bands that have that.
It's kind of similar to the vibe of like your popular song is like a cover of an old song or whatever.
Yes.
It's like,
which I can think of a band right now that I will
we're
talk a lot of shit on.
Not the time. Can't talk about that.
Can't talk about that. Is that all the spinoff bands?
I don't know. There's a lot more. I didn't make a list of them.
Okay. I feel like we probably should.
That's fine. I don't really have any desire to be like comprehensive. This is not for sure. This is not an encyclopedia entry. This is not everything there is to know about this band. This is just kind of.
I almost feel like we've done too much already.
Well, I think that will probably be the case more often than not. But it's just, listening to it over the course of a week or whatever and kind of trying to put a shape to
or a month or two.
hey, we all move at our bands. We all move at our own speeds. Oh, I thought you were saying I took a long time for
this.
You
did.
Okay. Well, so overall, big picture, we've been talking about them for a while now. How do you want to rank these? What do you think a good I kind of feel like ranking them in the order that you would recommend someone listening to them. I feel like that's a good ranking for them.
Well, I'm one of those types that likes to, I personally like, and this is one of the reasons that the whole idea of this project appeals to me, because I like listening to things chronologically or watching.
Oh yes, let's rank them chronologically.
What do you mean? Like,
let's just rank them in the order that they were released.
Oh my god. So I like to listen to things in chronological order because I have an interest in how things progress naturally. You know what I mean? I like to see the progression. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting too, because I've been reading these books that Twyla Tharp, she's a choreographer and a dancer, and she talks about how she likes to listen to things. I forgot the order, but it's not chronologically. She likes to start with like their newer shit or their popular shit and then go back to like uncover their roots kind of thing. Right.
Which I think is reasonable. And I think this would be a good band to do that with, honestly.
Well, I feel like the Clash self-titled album is just so standalone great that would be a perfectly good place to start to me. But if we're going some kind of crazy out of order, I mean, Combat Rock and London Calling are obviously the two most popular and iconic albums, and next being the Clash. So those three, starting with any of those three, would get you into it.
So I think let me give you. I think the Clash self-titled is a little too narrow in scope to really be like, because if you really like the self-titled Clash album, there's still a significant chance you won't like Combat Rock, right? Because they're so far apart on the musical spectrum.
So and you're going to say London Calling.
I think that if you like Combat Rock, you may be turned off by like the straightforward punkness of the self-titled album.
So London Calling being pretty much smack dab in the middle there.
Yeah.
It really is.
And it's also, I mean, it you said it earlier, but it is the band's legacy. Like it's what they're going to be remembered forever for. And it has a lot of the, they kind of take little tangents and stuff like that, but it's got the widest, like if you're going to go just in album listening, I think it has the widest range, but is also like the tightest musically. Like it's not rambly. And I think that you get a good example of like them at every stage on London Calling. Whereas self-titled, you just get the punk rock stuff, and then Combat Rock, you get a little bit more of the like world music, other influences. And London Calling has a little bit of everything.
Yes, London Calling was where their other influence first kind of started creeping in.
Right.
Like the reggae and shit started popping in there. So it definitely is a good starter album because, it hasn't gone too far yet into the weirdness.
Right. Like, I think if you don't like London Calling, you don't like the Clash, basically. Yes. Like if you listen to that album and you don't like it, you're not going to be into this band.
unless you're just some fucking weirdo that would listen to like Cut the Crap or Sandinista and just love it, you know.
Get out. No, I'm sure those people, I actually, you know what? I refuse to believe that those people were out there. I don't think there's a single person that would rank those two albums.
I disagree.
And they can't exist.
You would be surprised what kind of fucking weirdos are out there.
So I think I would start with London Calling if I were going to recommend the order, and then probably do London Calling, and then probably Self-Titled for kind of what you talked about, how it is just a great album, and then Combat Rock, because like by that point you're kind of primed to be like, this is what they can sound like, this is what they started to sound like, and now like where did they take it?
That makes perfect sense to me.
And then probably Give Them Enough Rope.
Just skip the rest.
I think Give Them Enough Rope is actually an underrated album. I don't think it gets the credit that it deserves. I think there's a lot of good songs on there.
Yeah, I thought it was great. It just didn't have. It was just a continuation of the first album to me.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and if the release schedule was weird, like the American self-titled album and the British self-titled album are not the same album. There's like 6 songs that are different on each one of them. So that's a weird. And it was also, I think the self-titled was released in the US after Give 'Em Enough Rope was released in the US. So it's actually their second album here. And then Sandinista. And honestly, I would recommend not listening to Cut the Crap. I'm serious. I just don't think that it should be looked at as part of their like cultural contribution. I think it's a fluke, and I think it does more to like, I don't know, bring down the legacy of the band.
It muddies the waters.
Yeah, than by listening to it at all. I don't think it's a necessary addition. I don't think you need to listen to it to understand why this band was influential and why this band was important. So that's my recommendations.
For me, just being a weirdo who likes obscure 80s music, I think listening to Cut the Crap was interesting. I enjoyed it first time listen more than I enjoyed Sandinista first time listen. Although there are songs on Sandinista that are incredible songs. So I think it's all worth listening to. But definitely start in the order. The top 3 are the top 3, no question.
Yes, yeah. And then they're a very clear cut top 3, and I think you could make an argument for listening to them in whatever order you want. But
so which one's your favorite?
Personally, London Calling, I think is my favorite.
So I had, during this re-listen, I had thought The Clash was my favorite.
Yeah.
But every time I get to fucking Combat Rock, man, I can't deny it. I love that album. I just absolutely love that album. So it's a hard call for me. I don't know if I can say I have a favorite. Great band, I will say.
Yes, absolutely great band, and a real fun journey going through it all too. I was we had been talking about this, but like everything that we listen to now is like, oh, The Clash did this, or like, oh, that's influence. And I know they're not the first band or whatever, but like, I think every band that came after them in some way was influenced by them. Any band that's in the like rock spectrum, I think, has influences of The Clash in there, who in turn were influenced by a million other different people. But it's a fun, like, little nexus to start looking at all the connections from.
Ooh, yes.
I think.
Especially like in relation to punk rock and in relation to every genre, because like our seed inside of us is punk. I feel like like that.
Not a fan.
Like that visual.
I didn't know where that sentence was going, and I did not like it.
I feel like at our core, we come from like a punk root musically.
Sure, yeah.
Or maybe just rock, but I feel like The Clash has that. Much like us, we have punk roots, but we listen to fucking everything. I feel like The Clash has punk roots and is everything at the same time.
Agreed. Yeah, I think that there's little strings that go from there and are incorporated in. a lot of other music.
Yes, exactly what you said. They're influenced by everything and influence everything at the same time.
Yeah.
Much like the Beatles, who the Clash notes as one of their major influences.
Never heard of them.
Every single member of the Clash on those documentaries brought up the Beatles as one of their main influences, which I found very interesting. I mean, the Beatles influenced every fucking band, like much like the Clash, like Talking Heads, like so many bands that changed the world musically and beyond music. The Clash is one of those bands. And there you have it, The Clash.
Truly the only band that matters. I know we mentioned it in the episode, but I have heard their influence on like every song I've listened to since we've spent this much time with them.
Are you ready to hear the next band we're going to do?
Yeah, let's do it.
Saves the Day. Pop punk from the early 2000s.
Yeah, a little turn of the century pop punk action coming up. Okay, I haven't spent much time with them. That'll be an interesting listen, I'm sure.
So if you guys would like to join in on the listen, feel free. You have 2 weeks to listen to all or none of Saves the Day.
So each episode, we're also going to do something for an entire season long. We're going to be starting our Wheel of Death, where we list bands that might be a little bit more of a challenge, a little bit less enjoyable, or maybe just has a huge discography. So I have the honor of choosing our very first Wheel of Death band for season 1. I went with the band that's kind of related to the Clash, but rather than doing what the Clash did and changing their sound kind of to the point of being a different band by the time they broke up, this is a band that remained really, really consistent in the way that they sounded and didn't do a lot of updating to the sound that they started with. They also have like 1 million albums, so this will be punishing in that way as well. Our first Wheel of Death band is going to be the Ramones.
I love it. Because I actually like the Ramones, so that's not that punishing for me. But this is perfect because you talk shit about them throughout this episode.
Well, and I'm not the only one. There's a quote of Joe Strummer in an interview right before Sandinista came out that said he wouldn't listen to the Ramones unless you tied him to a chair and forced him to.
The Ramones, the first entry to the Wheel of Death. Keep up with our entire season, and at the very end of the season, we will spin the wheel and see what happens.
Don't forget to follow along with the conversation on social media at RetrospectrumPod or email us your thoughts and ideas at retrospectrumpod@gmail.com.
And hit us up on Patreon if you are one of the first 25 subscribers. You will be grandfathered in to all future perks.
Thank you for listening to our first episode. Hopefully you liked what you heard. Leaving a 5-star review is an excellent way to share the podcast, but also tell your friends. Put it on a speaker out on the street corner and let people know that we're out there. And we look forward to our next band, Saves the Day. We'll be dropping in 2 weeks.